listening to The Truth Tank, and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. Happy New Year, everyone. 2025 has gotten off to a dramatic start. At the time of recording, it's the 11th of January, 2025. And so far, we've had one terrorist attack. Some guy blew himself up in a CyberTruck outside a Trump hotel. Earthquakes in Nepal, flooding around the world, and devastating fires in Los Angeles, which is incredible and not the good kind. Seeing the images on the TV are completely unbelievable. Seeing entire areas of Los Angeles just completely burnt to the ground. It was just completely surreal seeing those images on the TV. It's unbelievable. Seeing how the fire has gone from the hills and just wiped out entire suburbs very quickly. It's very reminiscent of the Black Saturday fires. I'm from an area that has a similar layout to Los Angeles, so I can completely sympathise when you see images of the hills and the suburbs on fire. 11 years ago I was in Los Angeles. I enjoyed it. I've wanted to go back ever since. One of the places I went was Santa Monica, and seeing the black clouds over the Ferris wheel and the jetty and the glowing orange lights in the background, it was just completely surreal. I would never thought in a million years you'd be able to see fire or smoke that far down the coast. But it's 2025, and it's looking to be one hell of a year. And that's what we're going to be having a look at on tonight's show. The first few weeks of 2025, specifically the New Year's Eve terrorist attacks. But before we get into that, the live communism draws ever closer. Recording begins at the end of this month. I'm very excited. I'm looking forward to it. The first episode will be out March 25th, 2025. So definitely mark that in your calendars. And don't forget, if you want to support the Truth Tank, you can follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Subscribe to the YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast channel, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Leave a rating and a review, and help us share the show around. The merch store is also growing ever closer. I want that up and running the same time the first episode of Live Communism is out. So very soon, you'll actually be able to wear the truth. Alright, so enough of that. Let's get into tonight's show. This is episode 66 of The Truth Tank, the start of 2025 and the New Year's Eve terrorist attacks.
Do you battle with things like anxiety, depression, and other mental illnesses? Hey, me too. Come on over, we can be besties. My name is Mikey on Mute. Join me on my new podcast where I talk about mental health, breaking toxic masculinity, and opening up the conversation. You can find me on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube under Mikey on Mute Podcast, where I'll tell you my story, as well as the stories of others, get perspective, and see where we can grow. Are you one of the cool kids that's on TikTok? Hey, me too. Search out Mikey on Mute to see show clips there as well. I really look forward to hearing your story and opening up the rest of this conversation. Talk to you soon.
So technically, these two events happened on the 31st of December 2024. So we can't officially say that they kick off 2025. But they are going to play a part in the story of 2025, for better or for worse. Mostly worse. And unfortunately, it's how 2024 ended and 2025 begun. So just when you thought 2024 couldn't get any worse, it did. And it's not exactly a positive way to start a new year. And just in case you've been sleeping under a rock, I'm referring to the New Orleans terrorist attack and the CyberTruck explosion in Las Vegas outside of the Trump hotel. So we're going to be looking at both events. Is it related? Is it a coincidence? Is it a conspiracy that two guys who had served in the United States Army both carried out attacks on New Year's Eve involving vehicles and explosives? The CyberTruck explosion wasn't exactly a terrorist attack, and I don't think it's been classed as one, but we'll get into that a bit later. New Orleans, on the other hand, was definitely an act of terror. Both individuals were driving trucks, both had explosives and firearms, both had served in the United States Army, and had rented their vehicles via the same app. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. I don't really believe in coincidence myself. Yeah, there's always the random act of weirdness that happens, but in this case, same day, similar circumstances. I don't quite buy it. My spidey senses are definitely tingling, but that's what I'm going to try to get into on tonight's show. So first up, the New Orleans attack. Who was the attacker? What were the motivations? Why did he carry out this heinous attack? And why New Orleans? So to find the answers to these questions, I have turned to one of my favourite news sources, The Guardian. In this article I found on theguardian.com, titled Deadly New Orleans Attack Underscores Looming Threat of ISIS Attacks in the US. It's by Ben McCouch, however you pronounce his name, published Sunday 5th of January 2025. Islamic State has urged followers to attack the US, and the Attorney General has called the group a top security concern. Interesting and highly concerning. If you're a listener of the Sean Ryan show, he had been talking about this for the last couple of months. It's one of those shows that I've always wanted to listen to, but some of the episode lengths were like 4 or 5 hours, and I just hadn't had the time. But probably in the last 6 months or so, I've really been getting into it, listening to it on a weekly basis. It's a great show, and some of the things that I mentioned on that show are highly concerning. IS attacks on the US was one of them. I'll be referring to that a few times during this episode. Back to the article. The Islamic State IS threat on the US homeland has caused renewed concern as more details emerge about the man allegedly behind what the FBI is calling, quote, an act of terrorism in New Orleans on New Year's Day that killed 14 and injured scores more. US citizen and Army veteran Shamsud Din Jabbar, 42, was killed in the attack after driving into partygoers on Bourbon Street and engaging police in a gunfight. Found inside his rental truck was the infamous black flag of IS. It was later revealed that he pledged allegiance to the group in a series of videos posted to Facebook mere hours beforehand. And yeah, look, that could just be some batshit crazy lunatic who's just looking for a cause to validate his actions. It's much easier to blame an external group than take responsibility for your own actions, because it should be pretty easy to track down via his internet history if he had been radicalised, I think. If he's only pledging allegiance to the group a few hours before he carries out the attack, I don't know, I don't think he would be the most hardcore jihadist somehow. I think he's more of a fuckhead looking for an outlet for his hate and a way to validate the way he feels about society, and he's just using that more or less as an excuse. The ISIS flag, same thing, is he just caught up in the hype of it all. It's far easier to throw up a terrorist flag than write your own manifesto and why you did what you did. If he's radicalised, it's far easier to blame the external force. To a point, it always comes down to individual responsibility. It seems like if he was a hardcore jihadist, there would be more evidence for it, and maybe that turns up. It's still pretty early days. I mean, it's only like 11, 12 days ago that happened, that time of recording. It'd be interesting to see what is dug up on this guy in the future. Pledging your allegiance a few hours beforehand doesn't really convince me that you're the most hardcore of Harrys out there. Though public perceptions of IS suggest it has now suddenly reappeared in the pantheon of terrorist organisations active in the US, top officials and analysts have been warning for months that a stateside attack was imminent. Yet I don't think they ever really went away. I think the West conveniently forgot them because they had been beaten in Syria and in the Middle East. They rebranded, joined other terrorist organisations, and more or less focused their efforts on Europe and went quiet. That doesn't mean that the beast is dead. It just means that it's regrouping and rearming. And to assume that they had just been beaten and forgotten without any hardcore proof seems a bit naive from the ABC agencies. And going back to Sean Ryan, that's something that Sarah Adams, a CIA analyst, mentioned on the show, that they haven't really gone away. They've just rebranded. The European version's called ISIS-K, and we had that attack in Russia. Was it mid last year, the opera attack? ISIS-K reclaimed responsibility for it. They seem to be more European focused. I'm not an expert on terrorism by any means, so so please seek other sources of information. But what Miss Adams was saying was pretty concerning. She thinks it's inevitable that the US is going to be attacked in 2025. It seems like a lot more needs to be done about it. It is highly concerning. Quote, "The attack was hardly unexpected. There had been flashing warning signs," said Clara Brockhart, a research fellow at the Safan Center who tracks the online activities of IS. Another quote from her. "In recent months, we've witnessed an unrelenting stream of rhetoric calling for violence during the holiday season, along with repeated chatter about low-tech tactics from knife attacks to vehicle rammings." Borchardt continued, "Given this, it's no shock that an attack like this occurred." Yeah, concerning. And we have seen lots of knife and vehicle attacks all over the world. I mean, how are you supposed to stop people from driving? That happened a lot in the UK a couple of years ago. Vehicle attacks were on the rise. I remember that bridge attack where that fuckwit drove into the footpath and mowed down a bunch of people before getting the absolute shit kicked out of him and chased down the street. Yeah, vehicle attacks are definitely on the rise, and it's not always terrorist related. That one in Melbourne back in 2017 with that fucking lunatic who stole a sedan and drove it into Melbourne, drove down Burke Street, which is a busy shopping precinct, drove onto the footpath and killed 6 people, one of which was a 2-year-old girl, I'm pretty sure. That happened January 2017. There's been a few attacks like that. They're not always terror-related. That seems to be the go-to tactic for terrorists in the last couple of years, is the vehicle attack, drive a truck or a car into a crowd of people. That happened in, was it Nice in France a few years ago? The Christmas market attack a couple of weeks ago in Germany, in Munich, I think it was Munich, where that guy drove a car into a crowd, killed about 10 people or so. This is happening more and more often. Then there's the knife attacks, and then a couple of gunmen will just turn up and open fire, like the attack in Russia. Yeah, terrorist attacks seem to be on the rise, and it is very concerning. Both the outgoing FBI Director, Christopher Wray, and the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, called IS an ongoing and top national security concern in the October press release. In a rare public acknowledgement, the CIA Director, Bill Burns, recently described IS as, quote, resurgent. That's disturbing coming from the CIA Director. Are they resurgent, or did they just go quiet? Or did you just assume that they were destroyed in the Middle East and that they were just going to disappear? And going back to Sean Ryan and Sarah Adams, she has very convincing proof that Osama bin Laden's son is still alive, and he is trying to create an Islamic army by combining all these terrorist groups together under the one flag. And they've been behind a lot of things, a lot of attacks that have happened in the past couple of years, one of which being the October 7th attacks in Israel. I think she mentioned about him, he's not like his father, he doesn't care about the credit and the glory, he just wants to have these attacks happen as efficiently and as frequently as possible. The CIA have disregarded this, and they think he was killed in an airstrike 10 years ago or so, and haven't really seemed to look into it. So it doesn't surprise me that the CIA Director seems so shocked that IS has, quote, resurged. A description now underscored by political chaos in Syria. That's another alarming and very interesting situation, is the fall of Bashar al-Assad's government. Are these rebels that have taken over Syria, are they really the good guys? Do they really have the people's best interests at heart? There's been a lot of ISIS fighters among those rebels. They've had the patches on their vests and stuff. There seems to be a mixed bag of people who have joined that group, and it remains very unclear if they're a force for good and for change, or are they going to create another like what the Taliban have done in Afghanistan and just become a dictatorship again, despite promising that things were going to change. Since the summer, IS propaganda has steadily called for American targets to be next, as a presidential election campaign rife with unprecedented political violence and assassination attempts bogged down law enforcement and intelligence attention. Yeah, that's also true. The agency's focus has been elsewhere, and look, if it's a deep state plot to get rid of Trump, then you're really harming the people, American people as a whole, because if those resources are going into preventing attacks on him that were, I don't know, was it some internal thing caused by the quote-unquote deep state? Was it the Iranians, or was it a combination of both and other groups? If you get rid of the political candidate you don't like to replace with a puppet, it's a lose-lose situation. You're not putting the focus onto the real threats like these terrorist groups, and you're trying to take out a candidate that might cost you a couple of bucks in investments or something like that. I don't know, I'm kind of talking shit, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say. On Rocket Chat, the chosen encrypted communications platform of IS, supporters and recruiters mingled in the lead up to the holiday season. One user left a YouTube link on carjacking with the message, quote, for the brothers interested in stealing a car and using it in the next attacks. Yeah, that's fucked. And what's YouTube doing about this? You can pull people, podcasters like myself's episodes for quote-unquote medical misinformation, but you're not going to do anything against fucking links to how to carjack someone or steal a car to use in a fucking terrorist attack? I mean, wake the fuck up, YouTube. Get your fucking priorities right. Quote, in 2024 alone, at least 5 plots linked to IS, both inspired and directed, have been thwarted within the United States. Yeah, concerning again. That's going to be a word I say a lot on this show, said Borkhardt, adding that the success of the New Orleans attack, which IS did not yet formally claim responsibility for, has already given an, quote, an immense boost to the group's efforts online. And that bit of evidence right there doesn't convince me that the New Orleans attacker was 100% in with ISIS, because they love to claim responsibility for everything. They'll claim responsibility for someone spilling a coffee or tripping over a fucking tree root on a footpath somewhere. It seems a little weird that no one's claimed responsibility, and yeah, it was very convenient that a flag and stuff was found at the scene of the crime. And look, yeah, I think he probably was just looking for a cause and an excuse more than anything. Ahead of the November election, there was an uptick in IS activities. It began with a Canada-based Pakistani national who was stopped before allegedly carrying out a plot against a New York Jewish centre. Yeah, I didn't hear of that one. Then in October, the FBI arrested an Afghan man in Oklahoma who authorities say planned an election day mass shooting in support of IS. Around the same time, a Maryland man was arrested on suspicions of supporting IS and allegedly trying to buy a Kalashnikov assault rifle. Yeah, fucking interesting. So maybe podcasters have been a bit tough on the FBI. Sounds like they got a lot of fucking work ahead of them. They got a lot of people to look at, and they only have a finite amount of resources, which is, once again, concerning. Very concerning. Already inside IS chat room, supporters were applauding the alleged work of Jabbar, calling it a textbook operation. Manuals and social media posts emanating from IS or its predecessor organisation, Al-Qaeda, have long advised the use of car ramming attacks. And how do you stop it? Do you just have to give everybody a 20-question quiz to make sure they're not a terrorist? I mean, I don't think there is any way to stop that. I mean, the only way I could foreseeably see a way to do that would be through artificial intelligence, scanning people's driver's license and internet histories in a couple of seconds. Anyone who has Googled or gone onto a chat room of IS would get flagged and have some questions asked, but then again, that's putting strain on the police and everybody else. So yeah, that's in a perfect world. That could possibly work, but in reality, I don't think there's enough personnel to make this type of thing happen, which yeah is concerning. Quote, "Die in your rage, America," wrote one IS supporter, while another immediately asked for guidance on how to carry out their own similar operation. It's disturbing. You could say the same thing about Syria. It's been under the thumb of a psychopathic family of dictators for the past 50 years. Yeah, the US isn't fucking perfect. It has a lot of problems, but so does everywhere else. Another quote, "Brothers, I need books on martyrdom attacks," they wrote. Yeah. How do you write that biography? With a fucking Ouija board? A book on martyrdom attacks. Fucking hell. As far back as 2010, an Al-Qaeda magazine called on followers to use trucks. the quote ultimate mowing machine for targeting Americans. Rental trucks and terrorist attacks notably have a long history. The Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh got a U-Haul rental truck to detonate his bomb rather than using a car registered under his name. Maybe that's another layer of security the rental companies need to look at. I'm sure they have some type of protocol for it. Maybe they need to look into people a bit harder if they want to rent a truck or a 4x4 or something like that. But then again, how do you fucking police that? How do you stop someone from wanting to get a U-Haul truck? What if they're saying, oh, well, I'm moving house, that's why I need it, I'm going interstate. It's far cheaper to hire a U-Haul than it is to hire a company. It's a very believable excuse, cost of living, etc. How do you prevent this type of stuff from happening? As I just mentioned, artificial intelligence is really the only way I can see in the foreseeable future at preventing these type of attacks. And that leads to the other murky side of the debate, is what happens if a Middle Eastern man comes into a U-Haul and says, I want to borrow a truck, I'm moving my family across the country, yada yada yada. And the U-Haul people say, no, we're not going to hire the truck to you because you look a little dodgy. Wouldn't that be classed as racial profiling? Then you get into the whole racial and discrimination aspect of not hiring a U-Haul truck to somebody. What happens if it's a white guy? John Smith walks into a U-Haul and they don't ask any questions, hand the keys over. He, like Timothy McVeigh, he packs the U-Haul full of explosives and drives it into a building. There's no way in the modern world where someone isn't either going to be offended by that, or there's an easy way to do that without going into another murky world of either discrimination or social controls and security protocols. In the celebration of the New Orleans attack, an online IS supporter celebrated Jabbar's alleged skills in following the instructions of a car ramming attack. Quote, ramming attack, shooting attack, they enthusiastically wrote. Quote, if it's a brother, he's a legend. And is this just a case of lost, highly disturbed individuals who want to be part of a cause because they're pissed off at the state of the world, or they haven't got what they wanted out of life? Like this Jabbar guy, is he just using IS as a way of directing his hate and frustrations? Is he using that as the excuse to carry out these attacks rather than dealing with his own personal problems? And it seems like a lot of these quote-unquote supporters are in a similar vein. Not all of them, obviously, but it doesn't seem like they're all jihadists in the Middle East somewhere. It seems like these are very disillusioned young people looking for a cause or a belief because they believe modern society has failed them, which is another kettle of fish and another whole world of problems, because then you have to look at all the things in society that these people think is wrong. But then you also have to look at yourself and go, well, why the fuck are you so special? If you're not getting something out of life, there's probably a reason for that. But that's a discussion for another day. It's unclear if Jabbar was a bona fide IS operative or merely a follower who engaged with the terror group's vast online archive. IS has prioritised inspiring desperate followers via recruitment literature spread in chat rooms or on apps like Telegram, calling on them to commit acts of terrorism that would otherwise risk their operatives and networks in hostile countries. In other words, the chat rooms are inspiring disillusioned individuals to carry out attacks in the name of IS, so they don't have to expose their own agents to being gunned down by the police or arrested in foreign countries. In other words, they just want to spark chaos for chaos' sake and use any available resource they have at hand, which unfortunately is disillusioned young people, which is sick. Like I mentioned, I think Jabbar falls into that category, even though he's not really the disillusioned young person you would think of. I mean, this is a guy that's been in the army and served his country, so he doesn't exactly rise to the top of the list for the candidate to carry out an attack like this. Like the article said, they have a huge online archive. They know how to use the power of the internet, and they know how to target young people, especially disillusioned ones. Another quote, do you wish to participate in the blessed obligation of jihad in the way of Allah? yet lack any connection or endorsement to IS, asked a recent piece of IS propaganda. Oh, fucking hell, that's just like a recruitment poster from World War II. Quote, "Do not despair. For now, you can strike at the enemies of Islam wherever you are and fulfill the blessed duty of jihad." Yeah, fucking hell, that is scary. They are way too tech savvy. And that is like a military recruitment poster you've seen throughout history, or any type of political campaign, social campaign of any type. It even has its own catchy statement or catchphrase. It's fucking highly disturbing. Another quote, "Your pledge of allegiance to the caliphate has been accepted. You are one of us and we are one with you." Yeah, that's a very good piece of propaganda. Your pledge of allegiance to the caliphate has been accepted. You are one of us and we are one with you. If that doesn't strike to the very soul of the wayward individual, I don't know what does. That's like the Uncle Sam poster, "We want you." What can little old me do against the problems of the world? The Uncle Sam figure says, "Join the army and serve your country defending against its enemies," or something along those lines. And this is the same thing. It's, you are one of us. To a wayward lost person, "Oh, I'm joining this group. Oh, awesome. I'm part of them and they're with me." It's that inclusive propaganda, that manipulation that someone, and I keep saying young people, but this could be anybody of any age really, or to a certain degree anyway. Anyone who feels lost and abandoned by modern society, and they're using the power of the internet and social media to strike the heart and recruit people. They know all too well how to use the internet for their despicable purposes. And once again, why can't the social media companies do anything about it? And they can silence a Trump supporter or an anti-vaxxer or a sovereign citizen or someone like that, but they can't do anything against a fucking legitimate terrorist organization recruiting young people to kill people. A lot of blame has to fall back onto internet providers, especially social media and sites like YouTube, for allowing this filth on their platform. Despite your views on freedom of speech, things like this are unacceptable on any type of platform. If it was a white supremacist or a neo-Nazi organization, it would probably have been silenced, but for whatever reason, this seems to slip through the cracks, and it didn't obviously mention Facebook or anyone like that, and they probably are not on Facebook, but they seem to be pretty easily accessible, or at least it's easy enough for people to be able to find them and get indoctrinated by the propaganda. Likewise, as one supporter on Rocket Chat referred to Jabbar's actions, heeding the calls of IS, quote, "The point is to cause widespread fear. Now US law enforcement and intelligence officials have the difficult task of wading through the potential onslaught of copycats or would-be IS supporters who might try to replicate the same type of operation." Yeah, that's always the concern with anything like this, is the fucking copycats. The fucking worst of the worst. Quote, "IS poses threats in the form of dedicated operations, guided plots, and inspiring followers to mobilize," said Lucas Weber, a senior threat intelligence analyst at Tech Against Terrorism. Quote, "The organization and a greater movement will look to leverage the attack for propaganda purposes and to build support." After the lethal IS attack on a Moscow theatre that killed 145 people in March, that's nearly a year ago, Weber said there was a surge in propaganda calls for the US to be next. Quote, "IS, its branches and pro-IS propaganda outlets have continued to heavily focus on the United States as a leading enemy and top priority target," he said. "Given IS's evolving online guidance activities, it's vital for governments to build open source intelligence capabilities to identify and disrupt plots." Yes, there needs to be another whole online division or department dedicated to shutting down terrorist propaganda at the source. Yeah, it's like playing whack-a-mole. As soon as you silence one, another one pops up. But there needs to be a more concerted effort to stop this type of shit from happening. It just seems all too easy for people to be able to access this type of information and carry out these attacks. Yeah, regardless of the freedom of speech argument, I think there probably needs to be some type of, rule, clause, independent thought on if freedom of speech constitutes terrorism or violence, as the social media companies keep telling us. If there's a threat of violence to a person or group, that's considered hate speech. It should also carry on. Well, if it doesn't already, I'm not an expert on this. There should be a similar thing here. If a group is calling for the death of people and to attack them, then there needs to be more concerted effort to fucking try to silence that, or have some type of deprogramming operation or center where people who have been indoctrinated by this propaganda can seek help. The real world, as I've said before, has ignored the digital world for far too long, and now the digital world has become the real world a lot of people fucking live in. And a lot of people, especially young people, get all their information and news off of social media. And all it takes is from one recruiter to say the right things to a young person, any person, to tell them what they want to hear, and they go and join. 30 years ago, it was biker gangs and street gangs that were recruiting young people to join. And now it's a terrorist organization hiding in the shadowy realms of the internet. Before the events in New Orleans, American authorities had been applauded for disrupting an IS plot against the Taylor Swift concert in Vienna, and even for providing Russian intelligence officials major geopolitical adversaries with warnings about the eventual Moscow attack, which they didn't listen to. Quote, US law enforcement and intelligence agencies have proven themselves highly effective in neutralizing IS threats, both within the United States and abroad, said Brockhart. Yet despite the impressive efforts, the truth remains, IS only have to be right once. Very interesting and highly disturbing article from theguardian.com. Yes, and unfortunately, I think the end of that article is unfortunately true. They only have to be right once, where the agencies, it seems to be a continual chasing your own tail whack-a-mole approach to stopping this online propaganda. But there needs to probably be more resources dedicated to doing that exact thing. For all the negative shit I've heard about the agencies, the FBI in particular, it does highlight how hard they actually work and the constant bombardment daily and weekly that they're under to stop these threats. And they probably get thousands of threats per day. How do you choose which ones you put your resources into? What's the highest priority? Not all of them are gonna pan out to be something. So, how do you go after the people who might commit an attack? And in the case of Jabbar, did the FBI stop 10 plots, and he is the one that slipped through the cracks, or they didn't have the resources to go after? Because like anything, they don't have unlimited resources. They don't have millions of officers around the world that can just follow every lead. Policing and investigation, unfortunately, is a finite resource. In the days following the attack, it became more clear on this guy's motivations and what had unfolded on New Year's Eve. One of the victims was Prince Harry's ex-nanny stepson. He was killed during the attack. And the day before that comes out, and Meghan Markle is flogging another cringeworthy Netflix series. Really, can she just fuck off for 5 minutes? You're not that fucking important. She is, in my opinion, one of the worst sociopaths in the world. She has this obsession with being the center of attention on a global stage, which is unlike other celebrities. Celebrities always want to be the front page of the news or in the headlines or have people talking about them, but the way she does it, it seems that anytime something happens in the world, she has to remind people that she's still here and she's still a current thing. And why I'm going off on this tangent is there's more focus on Prince Harry and Meghan than the young man that lost his life during the attack, because he has this connection to the prince. That's the name that people will take away from this, is it's Prince Harry and Meghan's former nanny stepson, without there being the focus on the stepson, the man that lost his life. And whether this was just a coincidence in the timing, I think it was in this case. His life has been overshadowed by the connection to Prince Harry, which, I think is wrong. So let's take a deeper look into the man that carried out the attacks in New Orleans. This article comes from Forbes.com by Salatia Ray. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Salatia Ray is a New Delhi-based Forbes News Team reporter. The article is called "Here's What We Know About New Orleans Truck Attack Suspect" as FBI probes trips to Egypt, Canada, and Louisiana. Published 5th of January 2025. The FBI has identified 42-year-old Shamsud Din Jabbar as the man accused of killing at least 14 people in New Orleans early on New Year's Day by ramming a truck into a crowd, an incident that is now being probed as an ISIS-inspired terrorist attack. With investigators adding Sunday, they're looking into 2 earlier visits to New Orleans and a trip to Egypt. Okay, interesting. Jabbar, who died at the scene of the attack, is a US-born citizen from Texas who served in the Army. FBI Assistant Special Agent in charge, Alethea Duncan, said at Wednesday's afternoon's press conference. Jabbar reportedly said in 2020 YouTube video he was born in Beaumont, Texas, a city of just over 100,000 people, located about 80 miles east of Houston, and worked in real estate in the Houston area. So he seems like a pretty normal guy on the surface. He comes from a small town in the USA. He has a normal job in real estate. He's served his country. Not exactly the highest on the list of candidates to pledge allegiance to a terrorist organization and carry out a terror attack. So how do you predict and stop future attacks and the individuals from carrying them out? I don't think there's an easy or clear answer for that, especially when the perpetrator seems like a very normal, average guy. I would think at least anyone who has served their country in the armed forces would be probably very low, or there is a very low probability of them joining a terrorist organization or committing a terrorist act of any kind. Yeah, I mean, they can always turn or become disillusioned or go AWOL, but I would imagine it's a very low percentage of the military population that would do that, because it seems like you have to be very patriotic in the first place to join the military to serve the country. Back to the article. Jabbar made several trips in the lead up to the attack, the FBI said Sunday. He visited New Orleans in October and November, using Meta smart glasses to record himself biking on Bourbon Street during the first visit. And he travelled to Egypt and Canada in mid-2023 for a trip. The FBI is now investigating. Yeah, interesting. Egypt. Was he just interested in history? Or was he meeting a recruiter, getting training, financing? Was he being manipulated? Who the fuck knows? And that's the thing, is like there's not enough resources globally to investigate everybody's whereabouts on a daily basis. What are you supposed to do? Have an agent follow him to Egypt and Canada? Are you supposed to digitally spy on every person in the world? Because that's pretty much what happened after 9/11, and it so far hasn't made the world a safer place. It's made it a far more dangerous, less understanding, less forgiving, and less trusting place, in my opinion. So what are you supposed to do? Spy on anyone you think that might be a terrorist? And that's the problem with the war on terror and the security laws that came in after 9/11. Anyone who the powers that be deemed to be a person of interest or concern could get spied on, and that could be anybody for anything. Who watches the watchers, but who watches the watchers who watch the watchers? And who watches the watchers who watch the watchers who watch the watchers of the watchers? That can go on and on and on and on. Because unless you're the perfect moral being or a supercomputer, how are you supposed to make the determination of who is good, who is not, who's a person of interest, and who's just having a bad day or whatever? Like, how do you make that differentiation, and what criteria needs to be met in order to get on one of those lists? And that's the thing, is there's not enough resources in the world to track down everybody. And look, in the post-war on terror, post-9/11 era, terrorism has only increased. It hasn't decreased. So whatever reasons the war was fought don't seem to have worked very well. And the government, call it conspiracy theory or call it reality, whatever side of the fence you like to sit on, the surveillance programs brought in by the government haven't really seemed to work too well. They've just created more distrust with the government. The government's spying on its own citizens. Yes, in some cases like this, I don't think anyone would fault the government for looking into a guy like that, but it didn't prevent the attack from happening. In fact, he kind of seems to have come out of nowhere, and the FBI are only, it's not an FBI problem. I'm not saying they haven't done their job correctly or anything. The FBI is now having to follow up the leads after the event and after 14 people have been killed to try and connect the dots as to who this guy was and why he did what he did, rather than, more or less preventing a horrific situation from happening in the first place. And like I mentioned on another episode, it goes back to the Minority Report paradox: is how do you prevent something from happening before it happens? And then how do you then accuse someone of, in the case of Minority Report, murder without having committed the murder? If it's based on prediction, you can't really say they're a murderer unless they've actually gone through with it. So that's the whole conundrum of, if you're thinking about offing your wife for having an affair like in the movie, are you an actual murderer unless you go through with the murder? He travelled to Egypt and Canada mid-2023 for a trip. The FBI is now investigating. Special Agent in Charge, Lionel Mithril, said. The FBI has confirmed an ISIS flag was found on the vehicle's trailer hitch, and the agency said Wednesday it was trying to determine Jabbar's, quote, potential associations and affiliations with the terrorist group. Jabbar posted videos to Facebook hours ahead of the attack, claiming he had joined ISIS before the summer and suggesting he initially intended to kill his family but wanted news coverage to emphasize a, quote, war between believers and non-believers. FBI Deputy Assistant Director Christopher Rayai, however you pronounce his name, said Thursday. And that's concerning. And again, is this just a fuckhead follower looking for a cause or a supporter? Or did he go to Egypt and meet with a recruiter in the summer, and where he became radicalized? Did he go to Canada to meet another contact before planning this heinous attack on New Year's Eve? And I guess that's what the FBI is going to have to determine. Raya also said the FBI thinks Jabbar acted alone, a change of course after the FBI said Wednesday it does not believe Jabbar, quote, was solely responsible. And this is something that in a recent Sean Ryan episode I listened to, a guy he had on the show was saying he doesn't think he acted alone, and I don't think he acted alone either. One of the big reasons is he would have needed a spotter, and it seemed like there was just too many things going on with this guy. He wanted to off his family, but then put on Facebook a few hours before, and then look, the responsibility also has to fall on Facebook. Why didn't Facebook pick that up and notify the authorities? They love playing with AI and a bunch of technological wizardry like that, but they don't seem to put these systems in place that can, filter out content for potential terrorism or violence. If he posted these videos hours before, that's a couple of hours they could have filtered it, flagged it. I'm sure someone who saw it probably did flag it, maybe his friends or something, but then nothing seems to get done about it or gets passed along down the line to the police and the authorities, if that's how it works. Yeah, I'd be surprised if he was alone. Where he drove the car into, where he placed the bomb, it would seem unlikely that those spots were chosen randomly. It seems like there was a bit more planning that went into this, and him changing tactics from wanting to kill the family to then, because that would take the emphasis off the quote-unquote disturbed cause he's fighting for. Yeah, it does seem a bit suspicious or surprising that he would be able to pull this off by his lonesome. Jabbar has been married and divorced 3 times, wonder fucking why, and has at least 3 children, according to the Associated Press. A man who is now married to one of his ex-wives, whom he divorced in 2012, told the New York Times that Jabbar recently began, quote, being all crazy, causing his ex-wife to stop his 15 and 20-year-old daughters from seeing him. Yeah, okay, interesting. So when does the, quote, being all crazy come into it? Does that fit with the timeline before the trip to Egypt or afterwards? What does the evidence look like at this stage? It looks like he was probably radicalized went to Egypt to meet a recruiter, became further radicalized, and then becomes all Jihad Joe when he comes back. What do we know about Jabbar's military service? Jabbar was on active duty in the army from 2007 to 2015, working as an information technology and human resources specialist, and deploying to Afghanistan for about a year in 2009. An unnamed Army spokesperson told CNN he later served in the Army Reserve until 2020, leaving as a staff sergeant, CNN reported. Duncan says he was honourably discharged at the time of his 2012 divorce. He said in legal filings he resided at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, according to the Times. In 2004, he reportedly enlisted in the Navy but was discharged a month later. Interesting, so he's had a pretty long military career and he wasn't flagged as being a terrorist sympathiser or completely batshit crazy then. And the military is pretty good at filtering people like that out, so it seems unlikely that they would have missed something like that, considering he was honourably discharged and he was discharged from the Navy. I mean, maybe he just didn't like the ocean, maybe he wasn't into boats, maybe he liked the idea of the Navy, but yeah, he found it different from the Army or whatever. He doesn't seem like he had a very interesting role in the Army either. He's human resource specialist and information technology. So he wasn't like he was out there kicking doors down and going on missions and doing all the action-orientated stuff. It sounds like he had a pretty cushy job. And is it because he's had 3 divorces? Is that the reason he just had enough of his marriages breaking down? Rather than work on yourself, he blames the wife, and that led him down the path of hating society and Western culture and pushed him towards this ideology. Who knows? This is just the thoughts of a podcaster. But it does seem a little sus that the Army didn't have any red flags about him. Otherwise, they would have dishonourably discharged him. He deploys to Afghanistan for about a year in 2009, an unnamed Army spokesperson, yada, yada, yada. Then he serves in the reserves for another 9 years. Yeah, that's interesting. So, like I said before, he doesn't seem like the ideal candidate to become radicalised and pledge allegiance to a terrorist organisation. He obviously liked the military. He was in it for long enough. He served his country multiple times. Yes, he wasn't a door kicker or anything like that, but he still served. And it looks like he's got nearly a 20-year military career. So it just seemed very weird that like you get to 2020, and then in 4 years he turns into quite acting all crazy, jihadist Joe, pledging allegiance to IS. Where did Jabbar work? Jabbar described himself as a real estate professional in a 2020 video seen by CNN and The Times. Texas Real Estate Commission records show Jabbar's sales agent's license expired last year in a court document filed as part of his second divorce in 2022. Yeah, so is it the second and third divorces that pushed him over the edge? Because it looks like they come pretty quickly, 2022, and we're assuming 2024. He has gone to court a few times. He did have a pretty good job as a real estate agent. They get decent money, so financially he seems to be pretty successful. He seems to have the money to travel. He's got out of the Army, and look, it's nearly 20 years. Did he get a military pension? He's got money coming in from being a real estate agent. He doesn't seem like he's a moron either. If he's become a real estate agent by coming out of the Army, information technology and human resources, again, he just doesn't seem like the typical candidate. Jabbar disclosed he worked for an accounting firm, Deloitte, at the time, and earned around $120,000 a year, according to the Times. Deloitte told several news outlets he began working at the company in 2021. Yeah, interesting. He's making over $100,000 a year. He's financially in a pretty good place, far better than most of the population. So money doesn't seem to be a motivator. Maybe it's the emotional shit that happened with the wives and being dragged through court. Yeah, who knows? He just seems like an oddball. Where did Jabbar attend school? Jabbar attended Central High School in Beaumont, Texas, graduating in 2001. His childhood friend, Chris Posson, told The Times, in 2017, after leaving active duty military service, he graduated from Georgia State University with a Bachelor's of Business Administration. Okay, so he doesn't seem like he's stupid either. He seems like he's quite switched on, which again raises some more questions about how this dude was able to be radicalized. Look, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not an expert in this field, but I would make I'd make a deduction and say that people of a higher intelligence are probably less likely to be manipulated or indoctrinated by external forces and less inclined to believe bullshit. I'd like to think of myself as not being easily swayed. I'm not someone who's just going to take the word of someone else and go do something because they've told me to do it, or that this cause needs to be fought because X, Y, and Z. There's always many factors. I don't believe the world is black and white. It exists in the realm of varying shades of grey. So that it seems like this dude was smart, so which is, odd that he was radicalised. And in a short amount of time, it seems like, well, maybe I should just get a job as an FBI agent. Jabbar told the school campus paper in 2015 he was struggling to readjust to civilian life. He said it was often challenging to navigate the federal bureaucracy to get his GI Bill tuition benefits, and told a student reporter, now at times freelancer, quote, "You don't know how to speak without using military acronyms." Okay, so maybe he's having trouble adjusting to life. That doesn't seem like that's the inception of the radicalisation. I mean, I'm sure millions of former military personnel have found themselves in similar situations. Did Jabbar face financial or legal issues? And this might give us some more clues into why he went down the path of jihad. In court findings, Jabbar suggested he faced some financial trouble. Okay, interesting. So maybe despite the $120,000 a year, maybe most of that went to court costs. Records from his 2020 divorce reportedly mentioned late home payments, a, quote, danger of foreclosure, okay, interesting, and credit card debt, and said a business he started lost $28,000. More than a decade ago, his first wife sued him over child support. Yeah, okay, interesting. But the case was dismissed in 2022, according to CNN. Another of Jabbar's ex-wives filed for divorce in 2020. And he was granted a restraining order against him. Yeah, okay. The plot does thicken. NBC News reported the case was dismissed, but the couple later got divorced in 2022. He was reportedly charged with driving under the influence during his time at Fort Bragg in 2014 and pleaded guilty a year later. The Times also reported Jabbar was charged with 2 minor crimes in 2002 and 2005. First for misdemeanor theft in Katy, Texas, near Houston, and later for driving with an invalid license. Okay, so yeah, maybe he's suffering PTSD from a time in the military. I know he didn't see any action, but maybe it was PTSD from leaving the military and the struggle to adjust to civilian life and the pressures of studying and all that, and the divorces seem to have played quite a big part in that as well. And child support too, if he's got 3 kids with 3 different wives and they're all asking for child support despite the $120,000 and he makes a year, and all the courtroom drama he seems to have got, I don't think that $120,000 is going to go too far. So maybe, he just becomes stressed with his poor life choices and decided to direct the anger at his fellow countrymen rather than look at his own past mistakes. What have Jabbar's friends and family members said? The suspect's younger brother, Abda Jabbar, that's an interesting name, told the Times he's, quote, shocked by all of this and, quote, would never have imagined him doing something like this, describing his brother as a, quote, sweetheart and really smart, caring. He told the Times the 2 brothers were raised as Christians and his siblings later converted to Islam. Though he added, quote, what he did does not represent Islam. This is more some type of radicalisation, not religion. Meanwhile, Jabbar's childhood friend Posson told the Times he, quote, made good grades and, quote, wasn't a troublemaker at all, and noticed on Facebook Jabbar had, quote, gotten really passionate about his faith in recent years, but was never threatening any violence. Posson also told NBC News Jabbar, whom he called Sham, was, quote, very quiet, very reserved, and his social media posts about religion were always positive. Peace be with you, uplifting type of stuff. His neighbour, Mumtaz Bashar, told CNN that Jabbar was quiet and didn't show any, quote, red flags, and said Jabbar told him a day before the attack when he saw Jabbar packing up his truck, he was moving to New Orleans for work. That is very, very interesting and concerning. No red flags. He's a nice guy. I reckon every serial killer and anyone who's ever done anything like this has always been described by friends and family as, quote, being a sweetheart, wouldn't hurt a fly, caring, was quiet, reserved, kept to himself, helped the old lady next door take the garbage out every week, was polite and friendly, would say hi to the neighbourhood kids, walk the dog, didn't have a violent bone in his body, but then later does something like this. It always seems to be that same type of persons. I don't know what else to make of that. That's interesting. What details are known about the ramming attack? According to New Orleans police, the attacker rammed a rented Ford truck into a crowd of pedestrians on Bourbon Street around 3:15 a.m. early Wednesday. 14 people were killed in the attack and dozens injured, RIA said. Several police officers responded to the scene of the crash, after which the suspect emerged from the vehicle and fired at them. His bullets struck 2 officers, who are in a stable condition, before officers returned fire. He was killed at the scene. Weapons and a potential improvised explosive device were found in the attacker's truck, and other possible explosive devices were recovered in New Orleans French Quarter area, according to the FBI. Key background. The site of the attack, Bourbon Street, located in the city's French Quarter, is a popular tourist spot where a large number of people had gathered for New Year's celebrations. The city has also drawn tourists for the annual college football Sugar Bowl, which organisers postponed from Wednesday until Thursday due to the attack. The FBI is the lead investigative agency probing the incident, and said it's working with federal and local partners to, quote, investigate this act of terrorism. End of article. It's very informative and well written. So that gives a bit more background into who this guy was and the possible potential motivations. Another thing that's got me really curious is the Meta glasses. Got a feeling these might be getting pulled off the shelf pretty soon. So let's take a closer look at the Meta glasses Mr. Jabbar was wearing. This article comes from 9news.com.au. It's titled New Orleans Attacker Used Meta Glasses to Record the Scene in Advance. It's by CNN, but it's on the 9 News website, posted January the 6th, 2025. The man who carried out an attack on Bourbon Street in New Orleans early New Year's morning visited the city twice in the months prior and used Meta smart glasses to film the street and plan out the attack. FBI New Orleans Special Agent in charge, Lionel Mithril, said. The attacker, Shamsuddin Jabbar, stayed at a rental home in New Orleans from October 30 for a few days, and during the time recorded video as he bicycled through the French Quarter, Mithril said. He also visited New Orleans on November 10, and investigators were still putting together the details of that trip. But Meta didn't think these glasses would be used in such an occurrence. He was wearing a pair of Meta smart glasses while carrying out the attack on New Year's Eve, but he did not activate them that day. The glasses were found on him after his death. Yeah, well, interesting. He was probably trying to live stream the attack, but forgot. Meta might have to rethink the marketing for these glasses. His planning was revealed in a news conference Sunday, in which officials provided a timeline of his movements and released videos of his actions hours before the attack. Jabbar, a 42-year-old army veteran, yada yada yada, we already know that, drove the pickup into scores of Bourbon Street revelers just after 3 a.m. on New Year's Day, and then opened fire, killing 14 and injuring at least 35. According to the FBI, the vehicle ultimately crashed into a cherry picker forklift, and Jabbar was killed in a shootout with the cops. The mass killing has raised questions as to how the city secured Bourbon Street and how a heavy-duty truck was able to drive onto one of the most pedestrian-heavy roads in the US. Yeah, it's also another interesting question. How was that allowed to happen? Because you think there'd be a lot of barricades or bollards or something in place, especially given that it's New Year's Eve. And if there are people walking all over the road, you would have assumed that the road would be closed. All 14 of his victims have now been identified by name. The final victim, identified as Letitia Pollock, I think that's how you pronounce her name, a certified nursing assistant and mother of a 14-year-old. Louisiana Governor Jeff Landry said in a news conference. Her family believes that Letitia, quote, would have wanted the city to turn out in celebration, but tinged with grief, but not in fear, Landry said. Random person moved IED, FBI says. Jabbar entered Louisiana at about 2:30 p.m. December 31st and unloaded his rented Ford F-150 truck at an Airbnb at about 10 p.m. About 15 minutes to midnight, Jabbar set fire to the rental home and left in the truck, said Joshua Jackson, special agent in charge of the New Orleans Field Division of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms and Explosives. Quote, we believe he did this and his hope was to burn the entire house down and hide evidence of his crimes, Jackson said. He also theorized that the fire could have been, quote, a distraction to divert police and fire resources. Yeah, interesting. The blaze failed to engulf the home and the fire department put out the fire just after 5 a.m. After leaving the rental house, Jabbar placed 2 improvised explosive devices, or IEDs, on Bourbon Street, and a transmitter to detonate the IEDs was found in his vehicle. Yeah, thank Christ he didn't detonate them. That would have been even worse. Bomb-making materials were also found at the Airbnb and at his home in Houston. He placed one IED in a rolling cooler and a second IED in a bucket cooler and left both on Bourbon Street, Mithril said. He left the rolling cooler at Bourbon Street and St. Peter Street at 1:53 a.m, but, quote, someone on Bourbon Street who we have no reasons to believe was involved dragged the cooler a block away on Bourbon Street, on Bourbon and Orleans, he said. Probably thought it was full of beer and that it was his lucky night. Then, I don't know, either opened it and thought, okay, maybe not, or couldn't be bothered dragging it around the corner anymore. But that guy is fucking lucky, because he could have detonated those explosives at any time, and for whatever reason he didn't. Whether he forgot is anyone's guess, but yeah, it's very lucky he didn't detonate both of them. Investigators found the cooler at the second position after the attack. The second IED in the bucket cooler was placed at 2:20 a.m. at the intersection of Bourbon and Toulouse Street. Officials have said Jabbar acted alone. 2 guns were recovered in the attack, a semi-automatic pistol and semi-automatic rifle. Jackson said Jabbar purchased the rifle in a private sale November 19 in Arlington, Texas, from a person who did not know Jabbar and had no awareness of the attack, Jackson says. These types of transactions are legal in Texas. Finally, investigators are looking into Jabbar's trips to Egypt and Canada and other visits to Atlanta and Tampa, according to Mithril, however you say his name. He travelled to Cairo from June the 22nd to July the 3rd, 23, and visited Ontario from the 10th to 13th of July, 23. He said FBI agents are digging into what he did on those trips and whether they tie into the attack, and I've got a feeling that the Egypt one especially might tie back to the planning. Mayor calls for review of city's plan. New Orleans has been installing new removable stainless steel bollards along several blocks, but these were not expected to be ready until the Super Bowl next month. Yeah, that's unfortunate. Those new barriers are only able to withstand vehicle impacts of about 16 kilometers an hour, according to a Reuters report. Citing a city-contracted analysis in April by engineers and city bid documents, Reuters reported that the assignment determined a truck similar to the one used in the attack could plough through the area at speeds ranging from 19 to 113 kilometers. That's a huge difference in speed. CNN has contacted the City of New Orleans for copies of the documents and comment on the assessment. What's the point of having the bollards? If they can only stop a vehicle at 16 kilometers an hour, I have to assume the speed limit's probably more than that. And anyone who had any type of medical episode or accidentally hit the accelerator is probably going to be traveling at a faster rate than 16 kilometers an hour. Likewise, if there's a copycat attack, what the fuck are the bollards going to stop? If a Ford F-150 is going 120 kilometers an hour through the bollards, it's not really going to do much. So maybe they need to rethink and put some stronger bollards in place. At Sunday's news conference, New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell announced a plan to ask a tactical expert to review the city's security plans, quote, to determine whether or not these bollards are sufficient. In my uninformed opinion, I'd say no, they're woefully inaccurate, especially if you've got the Super Bowl coming up. If they're not, how and what and where do they need to be placed, she said. This is a work in progress and we're committed to doing everything necessary to ensure public safety measures. The potential threat of a ramming attack has been well known at least since the mass ramming attack in Nice, France on Bastille Day back in 2016. In New Orleans, a private security consulting firm warned in a 2019 report that the risk of terrorism in the French Quarter, specifically mass shootings and vehicular attacks, remained, quote, highly possible while moderately probable. Neither of those are particularly comforting. The current bollard system on Bourbon Street does not appear to work, the report said. Yeah, that's fucking obvious. The city previously installed some wedge barricades on Bourbon Street but did not have them raised and in position on New Year's Eve. And officials said they do not work properly. New Orleans also owns some other temporary barriers known as Archer barriers, but Police Superintendent Anne Kirkpatrick said, quote, she didn't know about them prior to the attack. Well, I'm not sure that excuse really holds too much water. Like, if you have more barricades, why the fuck weren't they in use? It's New Year's Eve. There's going to be lots of people around. People drive drunk, so, you know, justification could be you're just going to put them out to prevent accidents from happening, but how does the superintendent of the police force not even know about them? On the night of the attack, a police vehicle was positioned sideways to try and block off Bourbon Street, but the attacker drove onto the sidewalk to evade it and then sped down the street. If the people who plan and manage don't even know they have these resources at their disposal, then what the fuck are you doing? We did indeed have a plan, Kirkpatrick said, but the terrorist defeated it. Once again, I don't think those comments hold up too well. If they had better bollards and security in place, maybe it could have been avoided, but yeah, that's all great in retrospect. And just before we move on, the reports keep saying this guy was working alone. I don't think he was. It seems like too big of an area to cover. He seemed like he would need some help. Yeah, maybe the IEDs were meant to be carried by somebody into a more heavily populated area. Why didn't he detonate them? Yeah, it's a very weird and concerning series of events. Burning the house down, the timing, why didn't he attack earlier in the night at 12 o'clock when there was more people around? Why at 3 o'clock in the morning? There's a lot of weirdness about this case. Could he be connected to a terror cell in the US? Yeah, maybe not. Was he just some crackpot working alone who wanted to connect himself to a cause because he was sick of his run of bad luck? Is he just a lone wolf inspired by an IS attack? Or is IS or another terror cell responsible? IS just getting blamed for it? Who knows? It does seem very sus, and as I mentioned, like, this is a guy that was in the army for so long, and then he gets radicalised, as we assume, online, or maybe possibly overseas. A few years later, that does smell pretty fishy to me. You think military personnel would be the hardest to radicalise? Yeah. I guess we'll never know his true motivations. And going back to Sarah Adams on the Sean Ryan show, it's looking like she was right about the terror attacks in the US in 2025. She theorised that it could be a very chaotic year, especially if the ABC agencies have dropped their guard. The situation has been made much worse by the fallout of the Afghanistan withdrawal and the Taliban takeover, and leaving Iraq, leaving it open to various terrorist groups to fill the power vacuum left by the Saddam regime, as well as all the dodgy shit done during 20 years of simultaneous wars, also known as the War on Terror. And if Miss Adams is correct, that will create more terrorism than it ever prevented, which is a horrifying thought. So the US might be paying for its past sins in 2025, and this is exacerbated again by very poor management, depending on what side of the political fence you fall on. Biden's open border policy hasn't helped either. It's flooded the US with untraceable terrorists and gang members. Ms. Adams said there are already hundreds of potential terrorists already in the US, waiting for orders to attack or mobilize. And is the New Orleans attacker just part of one of these larger cells or groups? It's a very alarming thing to think about. Unfortunately, this is reality and the current state of the world. But I think the icing on the cake, when you combine all these factors, is the funding the United States gives the Taliban every week. It's millions of dollars they're paying to the Taliban to keep Afghanistan afloat. Some of the money would probably go to the people, but I dare say a large majority of it is siphoned off for terrorism. I also heard on the Sean Ryan show that the passport agency is open and producing legit Afghan passports for potential terrorists to fly all around the world. They have legit untraceable passports because they are actually official passports made out of the government passport office. That's enough about the horrific events of New Orleans.
Sharks of the corn? Virus shark? Cocaine shark? Sharktopus? Yeah, those are all real movies. Join me, Steve Coates, as each week I take a comedic look at the bizarre world of sharksploitation cinema on Bucket of Chum, the Shark Movie Podcast.
Okay, that seems like a pretty good place to stop. We'll pick that up in the next episode. In part 2, we'll look at the very weird and mysterious case of the guy that blew himself up in the CyberTruck outside of the Trump Hotel. And that brings us to the end of the show. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. You can download and listen to your favourite episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, CastBox, YouTube, Pandora, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. Tell your friends, to your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread it around and get the word out there. You can also leave a 5-star rating and review on your preferred podcast player. Each review and rating helps the show grow and get found and would be much appreciated by me. Alright, I'll be back either next week or the week after. I'm on a bit of a roll at the moment. I've got 3 episodes in a row. It's the most episodes I've had out ever. 3 in 3 weeks, which is pretty fucking good. So the next episode should be out next week or the week after. And remember, March the 25th, 2025, the lie begins. Until then, I'm a tank, this is the truth. Truth to tell.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.